Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next series or the next webinar in our webinar series ahead of the HealthSpan show. Really excited for today's discussion. We've got some wonderful businesses on show for you, and I hope that you really enjoy the conversation between them. It's such an important and prevalent and relevant topic right now. So very excited to bring you today's discussion about tackling the loneliness epidemic to promote better mental health with a particular focus on intergenerational businesses. Now, just a quick reminder on the tech before we get going. Please feel free to use the chat function to talk amongst yourselves if you want to introduce yourself to other people who are watching, if you have any comments to make as we go along. If you have specific questions for our panel, please make sure you use the Q&A function rather than the chat. It's just much easier for our group to follow those Q&A if it comes in on that function rather than the chat function. But without further ado, I'm very pleased to hand you over to our moderator for today, Cynthia Bullock from UKRI. Cynthia, over to you.
Thank you, Angela. Good afternoon, everyone. As Angela mentioned, my name is Cynthia Bullock, and I would like to welcome you to this session, which aims to showcase some of the emerging intergenerational businesses who are seeking to address the issue and social isolation. Now, there's more than enough evidence, compelling evidence, in fact, that loneliness and social isolation are associated with poorer cardiovascular and mental health outcomes. We also know that older people are no more likely to feel lonely than younger people, but we do accept that some key risk factors, bereavement or living with a long-term condition, become more common as we age. This is in part why a key aim of the UK Research and Innovation Healthy Aging Challenge, where I work, is to support research and innovation that leads to innovative solutions to improve social connections amongst other areas. So this afternoon, we have lined up for you 3 great speakers who, through their own unique business offerings, are enabling people to sustain and broaden their social connections and relationships. So without further delay, I'd like to invite Harish Malhi, who is the founder of DiaspoModerator, Catherine McClen, founder of BuddyHub, and last but by no means least, Sanjay Lobo, founder and CEO of onHand. Welcome to our panel. I'd like to start by asking each of our panel to tell us a little bit about your business. What do you offer? And can you please emphasize how you are leveraging the current scientific evidence around social connections and its value in supporting healthy aging? And I'd like to come to Sanjay first.
Thanks, Cynthia. Hi there, everyone. I'm Sanjay. I run an organization called onHand. We're an on-demand volunteering app. We started in 2017, actually started by a number of charities, including the Red Cross and the RNIB. The idea was, how can we take volunteering, make it much more accessible, and repurpose our volunteers to help older adults with really simple things. Things like changing a light bulb, or taking the bin out, or getting the shopping in, or just providing a friendly voice on the end of a phone call. And we've grown since then and helped thousands of people at this point, and spreading across the UK at this time. So hopefully a really useful thing pre-COVID, but actually during COVID, I should expect the demand really rose for us. Some of the stats and science behind what we do. So as Cynthia said, there's a huge loneliness epidemic in the country. Some of the stats, I'm sure the others will have similar stats. 2.5 million people say they haven't left their house in the last 7 days. That massively skews the older population. Well over half of those aged over 85 and above live alone. 2/5 of all older people say that television is their main company. When we look at things like the characteristics of where loneliness skews, it is to people who are widowed, people with long-term illnesses and poor health. And then when you look at the stats of how this is going to grow, those over 50 reporting to be lonely should reach 2 million by 2025. And that's increased roughly 50% in the last 10 years. You can just see where the demographics are going here. Cynthia, I think you're still on mute.
But I could read.
Harish.
Hi everyone, I'm Harish Malhi and I'm the founder of Diaspo. So we run live cook-alongs, and they're all taught by expert home cooks with decades of experience. And so what we do is we support, empower and enable home cooks to teach their family famous recipes online. And intergenerational connection is really embedded into the core of our offering, because keen cooks get the tips and tricks that you can't get in a cookbook. You're learning heritage recipes that people have been making for decades, and a particular focus on minority cultures. We have cooks from Lebanon to Libya, Martinique to Mexico. And we're really focused on those who wouldn't report as lonely, but they are often alone. And I think that's a really key distinction from those who have maybe been spending 40 years working, and then the moment they retire, the extent to which they're socially connected is a lot less. And Diaspo then offers the chance to connect with like minds of all ages, but also spend time doing things they love. And I think, without repeating the stats that Sanjay went over, it's really focusing on both the mental and physical well-being, because intergenerational connection is a fundamental societal need.
Thank you. That's brilliant. And to you, Catherine.
Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm Catherine McClen. I'm the founder of BuddyHub. We're a matchmaking and introduction service which creates intergenerational social circles. We carefully match 4 people, all with common interests, who live close to each other. We call this new social circle a friendship wheel. And they're built around the location of our older members. They're people generally 50 plus, whose circumstances or health situation are affecting their social life, resulting in feelings of loneliness and isolation. And we carefully match them with 3 vetted buddies based on personality, shared interests and personal circumstances. And we're following the cognitive science, which says that friendship is the #1 factor influencing our health, well-being and happiness, and that we all need a close network of friends around us. And it's the loss of friends in later life that is driving the loneliness epidemic amongst older people in particular. And that's why our model is about supporting natural new friendships to develop. Cognitive science says that groups of 3 to 5 people form the closest emotional bonds. So by forming a group of 4 people, which is what we're doing, we're fitting in with that. And what we're going to be launching soon is a new service to match people into groups of 9 to 15 people based around interests or purpose. And this is the next naturally occurring group size in our communities, which is why we're now looking at that group size as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's so, I think from my perspective, it's just so refreshing. Connections are being made, not necessarily because of how old people are. So age is not the defining factor. It's much more about common interests and bringing people that have a common purpose. So my next question is around, how do you go about trying to realize some of those intergenerational benefits that we know is really important? Are you looking at it sort of much more directly, or is it an indirect benefit through sort of the work you do? Do you specifically target those objectives, or do they sort of happen a bit more coincidentally? And I'll come to you, Catherine.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. I mean, for us, it's intergenerational is the real focus of what we're doing. So I don't think it was when I began, but I realized as we set up BuddyHub and started forming these groups, they had a very multi-generational, intergenerational flavor around them. And I started to realize people really love that. I think as people grow up in different generations, they have different values, different experiences, and people find that very rich. And I think there's a reason for that. It's actually very natural because, you know, we used to actually, as a society long ago through time, we had these big interconnected extended families which all lived together. So it was a very natural structure, this intergenerational living, and these really help protect
that people in the society, particularly the most vulnerable people from the shocks of life. And then we've moved to a much more smaller nuclear family, and also into structures of single families are very prevalent in our societies. So, you know, we have fragmented from these big intergenerational groups. And yet, you know, most of the way that humans lived during the tens of thousands of years since we've been on this planet was really in these very, you know, the village life, small communities of about 150 people, where intergenerational living together was really normal. And I see people really crave that. We see people wanting to have that, you know, interaction, particularly younger generations with the older generation. I think they're really missing that. They may not have grandparents around. So I think actually today what's weird is that we tend to knock around in our age peers, and there's nothing odd about intergenerational mixing. It's really normal. And I think our lonely cities, we're all missing it. So what we're doing is really bringing that village life back into our cities.
There's a lot of initiatives, and some which we're funding, that's really trying to regenerate the sort of high street and make sure that it isn't somehow just locations where certain age groups feel that it's specifically targeted to them, that is opened up, and one that welcomes everyone and nobody feels sort of invisible, you know, that they feel that they're catered for, and there are things in there that is of interest to them. If I come to you, Harish, with the same sort of question, are you targeting that? It sounds like it's the kind of environment that encourages people with just a love of the same sorts of food and you know, interest to come together and have that be the driving focus.
Exactly. And I think it touches on what you said earlier, that age is not the defining factor, but actually it's a chance for everyone to connect through something that they love, you know, meaningful activities that you love. And I love the way Catherine spoke about extended families, because that's how I've grown up with my granddad, who's like 93 years old. And that's a story that underpins Diaspo. I mean, it's funny because in our family, my nephews and nieces know their great granddad, which I guess is not normal today. But that's really the story that underpins Diaspo and why we were founded, because I learned a huge amount from the older generation, but I also felt that there was a huge amount of experience, knowledge, and skills that were not being passed down. Absolutely. And so that is what I kind of tasked myself with. How can we unlock this experience, knowledge, and skills that the older generation have in a way that connects everyone, you know, and connects them through things that they love. And that's why, you know, the beauty of food is that it does connect us all, and we're really connecting like minds. And the intergenerational benefits come from learners getting that wisdom from our home cooks, but also the tips and tricks that you can't get in a cookbook. And our home cooks, older adults, really benefit from spending time on things that they love through new technology and actually developing meaningful connections, where we have learners who are now doing 20 to 30 cooking classes a month. Wow. And so there's really meaningful connections that are being fostered as a result of this. And when we start to develop kids cooking classes, it really directly emphasizes those intergenerational benefits.
Who doesn't remember baking cookies with their parents and loving every minute of it? Well, I certainly do. And to you, Sanjay. Thank you, Harish.
Yeah, it's great. It's actually great hearing these stories, because my 8-year-old has just taken a great interest in cooking. So it's like cooking classes with Harish. All right, I'm coming your way. But the millennial aspects for us has always been, the core hypothesis was millennials would really like to get more involved and just don't have an easy way to do it. And, you know, millennials get such bad press, or they have historically, and, you know, there probably are reasons for that. But on the other side, there's so much good millennials do that just doesn't get recognized. So yes, they've arrived as a force in the workplace, but as a force in giving, they're huge. They give a third of all donations in the UK come from millennials. Who knew, right? They get such bad press. So the hypothesis behind OnHand was, well, what about their time? If they give that much in donations, how can we make it easier for millennials to give time? And so our approach was mobile first, volunteer as much or as little as you want using our app. And immediately, it was a huge hit with signing up millennials. We were lucky to be picked up by Facebook back in 2018 as part of an accelerator program they did. And they massively helped us use their platform, social media, to attract, I guess, a younger generation into volunteering, but very successfully for a very low cost, which let us get started very quickly with thousands of millennial aged volunteers. So that was always a hypothesis. But really echoing what the other panelists have said, it feels like we've lost something on the intergenerational way we present in the UK and how we go out. I lived in Spain for 5 years, and there it's really noticeable. People go out, the whole generation, from the grandkids to the grandparents, they're all out together very often late at night, hugely different. And it feels like, hey, we need to get back to that. And if technology can help and the other things we're doing can help, hopefully we can help to get back to that in a small way.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. I think it'd be remiss of me to not mention the whole pandemic thing. So I guess the question to each of you is, what have you learned? What has the pandemic taught you? And specifically in terms of how it's influenced your business. So I have a couple of sub questions. So the first one is around, have you had to make any shifts, any pivots, respond to the crisis? And if I come to you, Harish, first, in terms of any changes you've had to make to tailor your service.
So we started this time last year, just earlier, let's say January, and we're thinking about in-person classes, but obviously, and they tested that out. And so our big shift and pivot was online, which was beautiful though, because it meant it was so far reaching. Yeah. And so we shifted to live online cooking classes, which we are continuing to do and focus on. And I think that was amazing because it meant people from across the world could join, where everyone was really longing for social connection and needing to. And so actually cooking along, we know everyone in the pandemic turned to cooking. It allowed us to kind of make the most of that opportunity and again continue to connect these like minds but across the world.
And were you seeing any sort of changes in the demographic that was coming to you? I mean, we've touched a bit on the whole intergenerational piece. Do you, granted that you were only just sort of getting started in January, but did you see a difference in the demographic you had in January who were interested in coming to the, in-person classes, to the demographic that then suddenly opened up to you once you went online and were much more accessible?
I think the most fascinating thing was the extent to which people were doing it regularly and why they were doing it regularly, because they were at home, they couldn't see anyone. And so I and many of our learners almost spent lockdown together because they were constantly online, whether they were cooking or just watching. That ticked the box of social connection for them. And I think that was a huge learning, that actually you can still be very socially connected online. All you really want is that sense of camaraderie. And I think the beauty of doing it in a class is you start with nothing, and then together you have this shared goal and this shared mission to all do it and achieve this final result. And so you actually feel some sense of community throughout the class and thereafter.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And if I come to you, Catherine, with the same question, the pandemic, how have you learned from it? Did you have to make any shifts, any pivots to respond to the crisis for your business? You're on mute.
Thank you. I was bound to get caught with that at least once. Yeah, I mean, I think, for us, we're all about face-to-face connections. So clearly, the lockdown and pandemic has been all about social distance. So it's naturally going to be a challenge to a business that values the importance of face-to-face connections. So like many other organizations we adapted to, you know, all along really say, how can we continue to support our members and keep up social connection as much as possible within the restrictions? So we've had to stay within the guidance, but our community have been really quite creative. You know, we already were, you know, used to home working, had a hybrid working model. So for the team, that wasn't really an issue for us. But we have just had to, of course, keep everybody up to date with what you can and can't do, but really encourage people to say, look, especially when the guidelines allowed, even if somebody's housebound, you know, even if you can be 2 meters away on the doorstep or by a window, it's going to make a big difference to get that in-person contact. So we definitely responded like that. But I mean, I think the problem is many of our members are offline. So I think one of the things that COVID has really taught us all is about, you know, people who are not online were already facing a degree of digital exclusion. And I think that was really emphasized so much during the crisis. And what we hear, particularly from some, you know, partners in mental health space, that, you know, people do want face-to-face again. There's been a lot of stuff online and on the telephone. And of course, that's been fantastic to fill in. But definitely, I think for us, the big push is as we're starting to come out of the crisis. I think a lot of, you know, there's been a lot of telephone befriending services set up, which are great, but some of them will be coming to an end, and people do want to start that face-to-face contact again. So in terms of, you know, the loneliness demographic, I mean, I think I was looking at the ONS data the other day. I mean, there's clearly been a surge in lockdown loneliness. That's natural and understandable. And I think often it's people living alone or younger people who've got most affected. But really, I think the same people who have had a more chronic long-term loneliness prior to the pandemic, I think they're still the people that we'll predominantly focus on, and unfortunately their situations often are you know, more difficult than before. In terms of you know, how do we, you know, there's been this groundswell of community spirit, how can we tap into that? I mean, I think for us, it's about thinking about, well, how does our model work? And we've always worked as a membership model where people, older people, pay a subscription to receive the matchmaking service. But actually, we've recognized, you know, loneliness is something that is really, you know, it's across the community of many people of different generations are at risk. People are working from home now more. That's probably going to continue to a greater or lesser degree. And people want those local connections. Absolutely. So actually, we're shifting now to a community membership model where everybody pays to be part of the community, really recognizing that everybody benefits from these friendships we're creating. So I think that's a big shift. And in doing so, what it's going to enable us to do is to offer some free sponsored places to people, because at the end of the day in COVID, people on the lowest incomes have really, I think, suffered the most. So that's something we want to respond to, which we're doing with we've rethought our business model.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think your point around the impact of inequalities and the ongoing exacerbation of those inequalities, and that's in health, social, you know, economic, it just seems to permeate society at the moment. And certainly COVID shone a massive light on that. It's worth recognizing it didn't create them, so they were always there, but it certainly brought them to the fore. And to you, Sanjay, what have you had to do to respond to the crisis? And are you seeing any demographic change? And how are you utilizing that groundswell of enthusiasm and community spirit that Catherine talked about?
Yeah, so I think there's 3 areas that we saw. So I guess first, very much like Catherine, so kind of overnight, most of what we did just couldn't be done anymore. So we used to have a lot of face-to-face interactions. Even if you're doing someone's shopping, you tend to go in and put the shopping away, realize as you're putting away there's things that are out of date, so you put those in the bin, realize the bin was overflowing, so you take the bin out. So there was a lot of face-to-face stuff. You know, changing a light bulb, you'd stop and have a chat and a cup of tea. And overnight, that's I think 50% of what we were doing just couldn't be done from one day to the next. very quickly, within weeks actually, we started realizing the way we've been approaching volunteering and who could be volunteers was also dramatically shifting. So before COVID, we were very much using social to recruit our volunteers. And all of a sudden, of course, you've got the NHS Responder app, you've got mutual aid groups, and this is across the country in hundreds of thousands, lots of people putting their hands up and saying, hey, how can I help? And so we thought about, well, we've got the technologies that can match people wherever they are. Can we help? Can we help match people regardless of location? And so for the first time, we jumped out of London. We were London and Newcastle until the pandemic hit. But essentially, we've gone to most cities across the UK at this point and have volunteers who found us or come via the companies or other businesses. And we're matching now across the country pretty well. And again, it's pretty much using that outpouring of goodwill that we all kind of saw during the pandemic early stages. So that was one, I guess, very positive benefit of how we were using the tech. I think the second observation Catherine touched on as well, during the first lockdown, I think there was reports around how the age group being affected quite dramatically was 16 to 29-year-olds, twice as lonely. They reported being twice as lonely as over 70s. And this may be, temporary shifts in who's affected and who's affected so dramatically. But that made us think about, well, the other side of our platform, we've got older folks that we help, but actually these younger folks, we hadn't really thought about their needs before. So that was, I think Harish touched on this too. So we started looking at the stats for them. Nearly a quarter of millennials, for example, can't name a single friend. It's like quite a staggering statistic when you read that one. It's like, well, okay, we thought we were helping over here, but actually, should we be doing a bit of both? And then we looked into social media and the connection with loneliness for younger generations. Very clear connection that if you spend less time on social media, that can reduce depression and loneliness. And so we started producing studies in that area and highlighting the need that actually what we're doing for loneliness is now across generations on both sides. Whereas, I think before there's been this large assumption it was only on one side.
Yeah.
And maybe the third observation for us was, and this is, really obvious, that the loneliness impact for workers and remote workers, remote working has always been the number one reason for employees to say they're lonely. And all of a sudden, the whole country's working from home. So what we very much saw in the second wave of the pandemic was organisations coming to us saying, "Can you help our employees with loneliness?" So that was probably the third big shift that we saw during COVID.
That's wonderful. So you guys have talked about, I quite like the fact that a lot of you are using tech, but you're recognizing that the tech should be an enabler and not the whole solution. Do you think that that a lot of the tech that are developed, and this is a bit of a curveball for the panel, but do you think that the tech is actually supportive of the whole issue of loneliness and social isolation? Because it can't somehow start to develop a scenario where people feel actually more isolated, because it's almost as if, particularly the employer thing that you're talking about, Sanjay, where it feels like, well, you've got all the kit, you should be connected, you can talk to your colleagues on Zoom, but people crave human interaction, like you said, Catherine. They want to get back to face-to-face. They want to be able to hold someone's hand, see their face properly in the light of day. So I'm just interested in the role that tech is playing and how you're being mindful that in itself, tech is not the solution, but an enabler. And if I come to you, Sanjay, and then Catherine, and then Harish.
Yeah, of course. So for us, I think the way you described it is exactly how we view it. We view it as the enabler. You can use, hopefully the tech makes it so much easier to find an opportunity to volunteer and go and volunteer. But it's the piece that connects you, a bit like, the examples are really bad, but say it's like Deliveroo, in that you're finding your takeaway and then your takeaway comes. But you're finding this volunteering opportunity, which is someone who needs help, and you go and help them either through shopping or a phone call or whatever it is. But it's how you find that match really, really easily, just the way you'll find your takeaway really, really easily. I mean, that's the comparison. Finding your takeaway in Deliveroo, really easy. finding a volunteering opportunity on hand, really easy, but it's then enabling the social connection. So it doesn't replace it. And it's certainly, I know there's experiments around robots and things like that. Like, I really hope we don't go 100% to robots in the future. I feel like tech still has its place in making human interaction much, much easier across the country.
And have you had any problems in terms of the adoption for your users of the tech you've got? I mean, granted, you would assume everybody would probably be au fait with it, but have you had any take-up issues, I guess? Because
so explaining our tech a bit more. So the volunteers all use the app. They use the app to find a local opportunity or a remote opportunity. The people we help actually don't tend to use the app. They tend to get referred to us via Age UK or the Red Cross or the NHS. The idea again being millennials really great on their mobile. But actually what we saw over the pandemic is the age range of who becomes a volunteer with us has really spread as well. So we have got into the place where people are like, well, I don't want to use your app. I just want to get volunteering. And that's not quite how Will work. So that doesn't work for us. Other issues we have run into during the pandemic is we use the tech to reimburse people too. So if you go and do someone's shopping, we do automatic refunds via the app. You tell us how much you're owed, you take a photo of the receipt, it's automated that you get a refund. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for everyone because not everyone can afford to go and pay for someone shopping and wait a few days for that to come back. So there are some barriers which we haven't quite got over yet.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. Catherine?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because I completely agree with your intro there, Cynthia, about tech as an enabler, and we find ourselves saying that as often. Because I do see solutions out there where it's sexy tech and you think, well, they haven't, doesn't seem to me there's an understanding of who your customer is, who are you aiming your solution at? And I think that's a common problem. So from inception, I think picking up with what you really said there, Sanjay, I mean, of course, technology can drive amazing efficiencies for your business. So for us, particularly on the buddy side, we actually require all our buddies to be digitally literate and on board via our platform. Because we saw, we were innovating traditional befriending and, there's a lot of pain points for volunteers sometimes to volunteer. We have to do enhanced DBS checks for everybody. That's a painful process as much as we've tried to make it as easy as we can. So people just, when people are joining us, they just want to get on and do the thing. Yeah. So tech is brilliant. So I think that side of it is very important. And actually the other bit of tech that's important for us is that we're looking to develop more is our matching algorithm to really support the matchmaking process. So I think, but that's again under the bonnet really of what we do. But I think what's been crucial for us is just to have offline and online routes to join us for older people, because most older people are joining us offline. They may have what we term a sponsor, which could be a family member. They're online, so they can, support that person to join us. But I think, technology is interesting. I think I've softened in the way I think about it. And I think the pandemic has been important, is that absolutely face-to-face is the most important form of interaction. The social scientists will back that up. They'll say video gives you that sense of co-presence. So it is important. I think we've all appreciated that technology, all the various modes of technology, communication, it used to just be the telephone. Now we've got, texts, all sorts. These nourish friendships and relationships at the times when we can't be together face to face. And actually nourishing friendships is incredibly important, because otherwise what tends to happen is they drift apart, you drift apart, and, suddenly the friendship can feel like it's gone. So, I think that as we're coming out of the pandemic, we've always had this concept of a tech buddy. If an older person would like to get online and they're facing barriers around knowledge and confidence, that our tech buddies would support with that. But now we're just baking that in, and just for every, unless somebody said, look, I'm not interested, which we respect, we're always going to offer that. I mean, of course, there are other barriers that we're looking for partners around, connectivity, access to hardware. Of course, people on low incomes often, I think we've really seen that, especially with the young people in education, how many people are excluded. So I think for us, it's, we're face to face, but we've got a greater appreciation of how technology helps us just run things, and how important it is to bring people into the digital world. You know, because there's so much online, rich resources online, and you know, I think that's something coming out of COVID that's become a bigger part of what we're doing.
Yeah, thank you. I really like the concept of tech buddy. Might just adopt that one. And to you, Harish.
So I agree. I think tech for us is definitely an enabler. I think it's supportive if it's designed in an inclusive way. And I think too often the majority of tech platforms or apps just actually aren't that inclusive. The buttons are so small, the text just isn't big enough. And, you know, I've witnessed that firsthand, and we've definitely had issues with that. But I think that is great to experience, because then the whole diaspora process, for example, is co-created. So in our submission form, where teachers want to request a class to teach, if something's wrong, our teachers then help co-create that. And I think actually that is, co-creation is really key to ensuring our tech and our design and our whole process is as inclusive as possible. Because really, if it's hard to use, then it's not designed properly, right? I think designers say that if it's designed for older adults, then it's designed for everyone. And I think that's really what we believe. And in tech in general, I think actually introducing older adults to Zoom, for example, then has a huge impact later down the line. For example, our teachers early on hadn't used Zoom before, and so now they can use it for other social interactions, whether it's speaking to their friends or family across the world. And while we might do in-person classes, we really believe that actually we can tick the box of making them feel connected when they can't go outside.
No, that's lovely. I should say to our audience, please do post your questions to the Q&A, and I will put it to the panel as we progress. If I come to my next question, just bearing in mind where you all are and what stages your businesses are at, what would you like to see either from policymakers, investors, private and public, ourselves, or even the broader sort of business community to help? The first question is around emphasizing how important social connections are and the role it has to play in the wider sort of population health improvement, but also actually thinking about for yourselves to support the development and scale of these innovative services aimed at addressing, you know, loneliness and social and improving social connection. So if I come to you, Sanjay, please.
Yeah, sure. So I'll take the easy one first. The easy part of that question is businesses. I'm sure all of the panelists, Harish, Catherine, myself, if any businesses are listening, or anyone who's got a team that would love to get involved in what any of us are chatting about, that's the really easy part. Please get in contact. I'm sure any of us would be delighted to hear from businesses that want to get more involved in healthy aging and what any of us are doing. The harder parts are probably the policy making and investor side. So we're very lucky to be working with Innovate UK and have some grant funding from Innovate UK, which has been fantastic. And one particular part of the grant funding, the COVID fast response projects, worked incredibly well. It was a very, very fast turnaround from the government team, which I think is unusual, but has been quite fantastic. I think what I've also recognised from that process, and then looking at other parts of the Innovate UK and other kind of funding processes, is they're quite hard for early stage businesses to get involved with. And there's a number of things around that. One is the application process itself is typically very long, typically very detailed, and typically requiring the kind of information most startup businesses, and I'm talking from start till 2 years in, probably don't have. And it's not that they just don't have the information that's being asked for, they don't have the time and resourcing to make that type of application. And if they do, they're very likely to fail. And I think recognition that they're very likely to fail is because they don't have the time and the resourcing to do it, or the information supply. And so a lot of the applications for grants are unfortunately skewed to a business that's already 5 years plus in, with a good amount of resourcing, and maybe not some of the things that someone like Innovate UK and other grant makers would really like to be backing. And I'm not trying to place fault anywhere. It's more a recognition that it's actually much, much harder for a startup business to really interact and try and find that funding. Again, we've been really lucky with Innovate UK and delighted with the funding we've had. But I would say we did make a conscious choice to apply where most of the people thought we shouldn't, because we thought it'd be too long-winded and we wouldn't actually win.
Yeah.
Probably the other piece there is on policy making itself, and very much related to the grant funding pieces. It's recognition of what any business in this area is trying to do. It's so human focused, and we've talked about the tech enabling it, but there's so much human focus on this part of what we do that it's very different to trying to measure a business that's just I made the allusion to the comparison to Deliveroo. We're not Deliveroo. We're not just a tech business. There's a huge amount of human interaction that goes on, which takes resourcing and cost in a different way. So you can't compare like for like. And I think recognition of the social enterprise world and how different that is, which I know, Cynthia, you're really keen on, is that's needed as well. And again, it's not fault labeling, it's more learning as grant makers hopefully pay more attention to the space.
No, it's really important. And I do take your point. I was having conversations with an SME who said we got 87% on your SMART grant and we still didn't get any funding. My heart goes out to them. Within Healthy Aging, we made a point of every time we said that we were not just, that we were funding businesses, we made a point of going, including social enterprises, because we really wanted to drum it into our operations and our partners that we were keen to attract those sorts of businesses that have a slightly different, I guess, commercial focus, for want of a better word, in terms of what they wanted to do with their profit and where their sort of focus were in terms of the community. So but points to take home and help us revise perhaps some of what we do. If I come to you, Harish, with the same sort of question.
Yes, great. Thank you, Cynthia. I think Sanjay summarized it really perfectly. I think the first point, and we're lucky to have won grant money from Nesta's Smart Aging Prize and Unlimited. I think the first point around the process is, for me, the thing that touched on me most is the duration of the entire application process, in the sense that you might apply in February and then hear back in, say, December. And actually, for an early stage company, like, those 9 months are so important that the company might not even exist. And I think actually just accelerating that whole process would be well, I think
it very diplomatically. Do you mean get on with it?
Yeah, you said it, Cynthia, not me. And I think the second point is really around balancing the impact with commercial, and that's always tough. And I get it from the investor's perspective. It also then gives the business side to understand the breadth and depth to which you want impacts to play a role, and balancing that with the commercialization of the business is always tough, right? Because it's a business and ultimately you need to be there to make money. But I think just general clarity around that balance would be super helpful. So that's on it from kind of the policymaker and investor side. And I think the broader business community, like Sanjay mentioned, I mean, for employee well-being, we run live cooking classes as a nice little plug. The other point is also just around the ecosystem and how we define or think about loneliness and social isolation. For us, like I mentioned, we're focused on people who wouldn't self-report as lonely, but they are alone. And I think when we think of this space, we really think of the people who are deeply isolated. But if we think of the people who are kind of they're just into retirement, or, you know, their kids have left home and they are alone, that's as an important issue and a preventative issue that we really need to work on and provide them with social connection. And the other point is around how we look at older adults in general. And I think the companies out there like BuddyHub and onHand are amazing because they're really supporting older adults. And I think the Diaspo spin on that is that older adults have a huge amount to provide as well. You know, they have experience, knowledge, and skills that are incredibly relevant. And how can we add that as a new spin, particularly in the vertical of cooking? You know, and I think that's like very prevalent social-wise and status quo. You might think of your mum's cooking or your grandma's recipe, but thinking about that to foster more intergenerational connection is how I'd like to think about it, but we're working on it.
Yeah, no, thank you. And just a plug to both the panelists and those, our audience, that UKRI and the Healthy Aging Challenge, of which I'm part of, has just secured partnerships with Nesta as an investor partner, as well as 24 Haymarket, who are an angel network. But they sort of add to the list of Barclays and Legal & General and North Star Ventures, who are also investor partners of ours. So they have a pot of grant funding for which they will put towards an equivalent amount of equity investment to help support companies working in this area. So certainly stuff that other people can explore as well. If I come to you, Catherine, with the same question, please. You're on mute.
Trying to follow Angela's instructions to not have the barking dog. So yeah, I think coming to the business side of things, I mean, I think for businesses now, employee well-being is a bigger one. I think, Sanjay, what you're saying, I'm hearing that out there, you know, businesses are more concerned about their employees' mental health. So I think more focus on that, especially if we're going to be working from home and loneliness for remote workers. I think that's something to think about more. And also to businesses, you know, who are you partnering with out there? You know, we're all impact organizations, and big business, you should all be, you know, thinking about who you can partner with. And actually, we are, you know, BuddyHub, we're impact and profit. And we're the new, you know, we're the new capitalism, right? Kind, caring capitalism. So these businesses can learn from us. And their customers are going to want to see that. So they can't just, you know, they won't accept social washing. They want some genuine engagement. So reach out with us. You know, that's important. In terms of the sort of question to policymakers and investors, I think, you know, to really, you know, some of the problems we're facing, social isolation, it's a huge societal problem. The numbers are massive. And as you know, the demographic aging, just whatever it looks like today, it's just going to keep getting worse. So we need to tackle, this is a public health crisis that we need to tackle. And so it's, you know, we need businesses that can reach real scale. And, you know, it takes about 7 to 10 years. Any investors will know that, to really take something from an idea on a bit of paper all the way through to actually really, you know, impacting on a decent size, some of these social problems. And I can get quite frustrated that there seems to be a focus on germinating brand new businesses, you know, but we need support at every stage of this journey. And there's definitely a gap. You talked about, Sanjay, there's a gap where, you know, a lot of businesses can just die in the gap waiting for the funding. We are coming in as social enterprises into a space that's traditionally been occupied by charities, who might have had contracts from the public sector and a huge landscape of grant funding. And we come in, we're just look very risky, we're different, we're innovative. A lot of the grant funding sector just won't fund us. Our risk profile is too high. Really, we're more of an equity risk. So of course, we're looking at investors. And you know, there is a growing pool of impact investors. They're not enough. We need really patient capital for people to stick with us. And some of the returns that investors want, these profit maximizing investors, we're not going to hit their returns. So you know, but again, I think some of these businesses have got to think about their customers and how the world is changing, and people want to see more impact businesses. So yeah, I think that's more capital. And to policymakers, one thing I would say is that really understand, you talked at the start, Cynthia, about the science of loneliness and isolation. I think, you know, there needs to be innovation in this space. So policymakers need to be welcoming new innovation and having little pots of innovation money. We see some, you know, maybe authorities where the money, we would be locked out of the funding. There's a health and wellbeing fund. As a social enterprise, we're locked out of that. And I think there really needs to be some rethinking in the commissioning and policy space around what's going to be funded, because you need to fund innovation if you want something to change. So, you know, that's important, and we don't see that happening enough.
No, absolutely. Is another curveball. Is social prescribing working for you? Any of you? Catherine?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's the big thing, social prescribing. It's been, you know, a big push from the NHS, from the government. I mean, you can think of a marketplace. You've got people in need of services for various reasons. You've got provider organisations at the other side, of which we're all 3 examples. And then you've got the broker in the middle, which can be the social prescriber. So I would say it's early days yet. I wouldn't say the channels, we're working very hard, we're engaging with social prescribers, but again, it's about, really, it comes down to a marketing challenge of who you are, what you're doing. We're a bit new, you know, they've traditionally been used to charities. So we hope those funnels, those marketing channels, if you like, will kick in more than so far, I'd say.
Yeah, no, thank you. And for you, Harish or Sanjay, Harish?
So we're super early and very similar to Catherine in that. I mean, it's a conscious, it's not something we're focused on right now. But I mean, I'm spoken to Sanjay about it. I'm really keen actually to hear his take on it. It's a very different approach to what we're focused on right now.
Yeah.
But perhaps
Yeah, no, thank you. Sanjay?
We've definitely got referrals from social prescribers, and that's great. And where they do refer to us, it tends to really work out nicely, and we see increasing referrals from those social prescribers. What we haven't done is really solve for that at any scale. So I'm talking a handful of social prescribers that found us and refer to us. Probably there's a miss on our part. We haven't been out to social prescribers and really tried to target them as a group that could be referring. But I'm guessing all 3 of the organisations here could be great outlets for social prescribers.
Yeah, thank you. That's been really helpful. So my sort of last question to you all is future plans. Where are you wanting to take the business? You know, in terms of expansion and scale. What does the future sort of look like? If I come to you, Harish, and then Sanjay, and then Catherine to finish.
So from an older adult perspective, we really want to be the place older adults think of when they think of when they think of activities they can do and love. That can be teaching, for example, sharing their heritage recipes, and later down the line, beyond food, going into other verticals. For example, arts and crafts, or languages, or music, but the other verticals where you kind of concede advantages to those with decades of experience, and that's a real focus for us. I think the beauty of what we do right now is that it's very instantly global. We've had people from so many different countries, and our immediate focus is to be the live place to cook along. And so when you kind of think about what you're going to cook for dinner, and you want to add variety to your meal while having an experience and really getting those tips and tricks that you can't get in a cookbook, you think of Diaspo. That's what we're really focused on now. And once we've ticked that box, then we'll move on to another vertical.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Sanjay?
I'm useless at cooking, so I'm like, well, someone showing me how to cook. This is great. So the question on the future is it's really interesting one, and it comes back to lots of things we've touched on. not least that we're all still relatively early stage businesses. So when I think about the future, it's really hard to get beyond what's happening next month, or even what's happening next week. And kind of what's happening next week is the world comes out of lockdown a bit in the UK, right? So a bit like Catherine was saying, a lot of the services we used to provide were face-to-face, and all of a sudden there's an opportunity to maybe do that again, but with a whole new client base in the case of OnHand. And so how do we actually put that into place? We're doing befriending, shopping, medical collections, dog walking across the country at this point. But now there's the opportunity to go back to the more interactive face-to-face piece. How do we, try and do that with the people that have come to us for befriending calls? I think most of them will be interested in that concept. But then we've also got to get over probably a load of social anxiety at this point on both sides. The older folks, but not just the older folks we help. The folks that we've got as volunteers, I think even there, even talking to my team, there's social anxiety around the potential that we might be able to meet up at some point in the not too distant future. Actually, half the team are really cautious about it. It's so I think there's the social anxiety to get over that. And then a bit like Harish, I think for OnHand, the future is how do we really become a cross UK service? We've gone to a lot of cities, that's great. We've experimented a bit with more rural areas, and we've got some great partners who work in rural areas who can give us volunteers, which is wonderful. And if we can crack that, well, how do we go international at a certain point?
Yeah, thank you very much. And finally, Catherine.
Yes, for us, it is about scale. And we're operating in a few boroughs in London now, and we're with this new community membership model that we're launching. We look forward to intensifying our presence in these boroughs and really replicating that out, being across London and then going beyond. So in the next few years, we'd love to have 50 BuddyHub communities and more in different parts of the country. I think, it works very well in a densely populated urban environment, but we'd look to see how we tweak what we do to work in less densely populated areas. But yeah, I think it's, if this particular model works, then I think it's just replication, because this problem of loneliness and isolation, it's up and down the country. So we want to be really shifting the dial, which means for all of us getting that scale.
And if we get it right, we all benefit, right? We all absolutely benefit. Thank you so much to our panel. Thank you for your openness. Thank you for your insightful examples of businesses that are really aimed at tackling some of the key challenges of innovating to support social connections and reduce loneliness. Many thanks also to our audience for sticking with us and joining us. And I'll hand over to Angela to finalize. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you to you, Cynthia, for a wonderful job moderating. I'll echo your thanks as well to our panelists and of course our audience. I hope you've enjoyed today's discussion as much as I have. I think we've been very privileged to listen in on the fantastic work that's happening from all these businesses. And personally, I think these businesses 5 years time are going to be a household name. So you can all agree with me that we saw it here first. Look, I'd love to see you at our HealthSpan show in May. It's free to attend. Our panelists will be back. It's a great way to get in touch with them, as well as hundreds of other speakers and participants. We actually have a full session, a roundtable session on social prescribing. So if that's something you're interested in, love to see you back there as well. I've just put a link to the show in the chat. Please feel free to sign up and we'd love to see you at the show. But in the meantime, thank you so much to all of our speakers, to Cynthia, and of course to our audience, and have a great afternoon.